And our penultimate speaker for the day is Ryan X. Charles, who is the founder and CEO of Yours Network. Today, he's going to have a discussion on Bitcoin Cash development progress. Ryan.
Okay. So I'm Ryan X. Charles, co-founder and CEO of Yours. Yours is a social network with built-in micropayments, and our thesis is we're getting people paid for creating and discovering good content on the internet with micropayments instead of ads. So Yours has a number of different what we call payment models. So for instance, when you write an article on our platform, you can charge for comments. So if you've ever been trolled on the internet, it might sound like kind of a cool idea that, gosh, wouldn't it be interesting if you could just charge people to like write a comment on your article. We have tipping built into comments, so you can earn money for comments. We have paid curating with our vote model. So what this is voting. So there's a vote button next to a piece of content similar to what you might see on Reddit or something like that. Voting costs 25 cents. The payment's distributed evenly amongst all earlier voters. So if you vote on something hot early, you actually profit from this because each vote gets sort of a stream of payments from everybody voting afterwards. So it's a way of monetizing curating content. Finally, we have a paywall. And to everyone's surprise, this is actually very effective at earning money. If you actually create content worth paying for, people will pay you for it. So our top users actually use the paywall. They do something where you write basically a free article. Before the paywall, you charge some amount of money, and people pay you for the article. That's the first product we built. We actually learned something building yours.org, which is we've talked with a number of publishers and content creators on the internet who already own their own destination. And one of our top requests was, we love what you did with yours.org. Could you please make a WordPress plugin that does the micropayment stuff so we can plug that into our existing website? So we made something like that. We call this the money button. It's kind of like the Facebook like button, but it's money, something that's very easy to plug into an existing website or app. And the idea is, look, this is how this should work. Like, publishers are funded predominantly from ads, although many of them are moving to a subscription model because ads don't really work that well if you're not Google or Facebook. What I want to be able to do is when I read an article on the internet, like at the New York Times, and it says something like, you've read your 3 free articles this month, I should be able to just pay $1 or something like that to read the article. So this is what we're doing. We're making that possible with the money button. We have a prototype of this available at moneybutton.com. You can try it out. We're going to launch a redesign of the money button that's intended to be usable to sort of normal people. That will happen in August. Now, I'm actually not really here to talk about my company. I want to talk about something else, which is Bitcoin Cash. We use Bitcoin Cash for the micropayment system in our app. So I'm going to first cover a bit of history of how we arrived at this decision, why we do that, and then talk about the status of what's going on in Bitcoin Cash development and what's the future of that look like. Before I do that, though, how many people know what is the difference between Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin? Okay, so that's like maybe a third or less of people. All right, that's interesting. So we started, actually my company started almost 3 years ago now, actually. And we spent from early 2016 to early 2017, we knew we needed micropayments. We couldn't just use Bitcoin. So we researched and developed routed payment channel technology on Bitcoin, similar to the Lightning Network. How many people are familiar with the Lightning Network? Okay, a little bit more than know what Bitcoin Cash is. So fees on Bitcoin were about 5 cents in early 2016. They got up to about $5 by 2017. So in that year when we researched and developed this technology, we had it working, we had a prototype. Fees got really outrageously high, though, and even with routed payment channel technology, you still have to onboard users, which involves broadcasting transactions on-chain. So when fees got up to about $5 per transaction in early 2017, we just couldn't use it anymore. We finally had all the pieces fit together and working, but we couldn't use Bitcoin because it was too expensive. We can't have our users pay $15 to miners before they can even use the software. So we actually switched to Litecoin, because Litecoin is technically similar to Bitcoin, so all of our technology worked on it. But Litecoin had some minor problems. First of all, the fees weren't really that low, so it was still kind of an issue. Also, Litecoin's long-term roadmap did not look very good. They did not commit to on-chain scaling. So when Bitcoin Cash launched, we were very interested in this because basically it solves the problem we had. We need a blockchain that just scales on-chain so the fees stay something reasonable. So fees on Bitcoin Cash are less than 1 cent. We tested this, we're like, oh my gosh, we don't even need payment channels if we just use Bitcoin Cash. So we sort of swallowed our pride after at that point working on payment channels for about 1.5 years. We launched a real version of our product, yours.org, on Bitcoin Cash. So that's how we got there. Here's the history of this in a nutshell. So how many people know the history of Bitcoin Cash, why it exists, what it is? Okay, so there are some people that know stuff. So I'll say it briefly. So Bitcoin Cash is not like most other altcoins. This is really a fork of not just the Bitcoin blockchain, but the Bitcoin community. A lot of people from the Bitcoin community actually switched over. They switched their business or they switched what they hold and so on and moved to Bitcoin Cash because there was a block size debate that lasted for several years. And for those of us that were really immersed in it, it really started to wear on us a lot. So in 2010, you can start to see that people were the subject came up that, oh, there's this maximum block size that limits transactions somewhat artificially to about 3 transactions per second. By 2013, you start to see a sub-community of people that were really favorable to keeping the maximum block size limit in place. 2015, Gavin Andresen, lead developer of Bitcoin at the time, emails the mailing list and say, hey, everybody, now's the time. We need to figure out how to raise the maximum block size so that blocks don't just get full, which would cause fees to become high. By 2016, the fees were escalating. There was a lot of drama. There's a contingent of the Bitcoin community that really, really did not want to raise the limit. And so we started having kind of an issue at that point. By 2017, I call it a fee catastrophe. Fees got so high that most of the use cases of Bitcoin, except just holding it, kind of went out the window, and you couldn't really use it for anything other than holding it. And so basically anybody that hadn't already switched to some other technology, either their business or personal, whatever they were doing, really started to switch in large amounts, or the new people coming into cryptocurrency were just adopting every alternative like Ethereum and didn't even look at Bitcoin because it obviously didn't work if fees were $60, which is how high they got in late 2017. August 1st was when Bitcoin Cash actually launched. Again, it's a fork of Bitcoin, shares the ledger up through August 1st, but basically has a bigger maximum block size and some other stuff I'll get to. By November, SegWit2x was canceled. And this is a long story. I don't have time to go into it. But this is when we're like, OK, well, we have this sort of backup blockchain. If we can't even increase the block size by 2, we're done with this chain. So we switched over to Bitcoin Cash. So there's not so much time left. I don't want to go over this. But basically, Bitcoin Cash has the original thesis of Bitcoin. It's sound digital money for everyone in the world. It's internet money. So a couple of basic differences between Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Core. One of the things we like to do in Bitcoin Cash is we feel the fundamental technology can scale. We've run tests on it. We've run all sorts of cluster tests and things where you actually test bigger blocks, and guess what? It's going to work out just fine. So we like to keep human scale transactions on chain. So we need to raise the maximum block size to allow that to occur as needed, and then scale the software to allow that to be possible. And so our research and development efforts are focused on chain scaling, whereas in Bitcoin Core, they try to keep most transactions off-chain. So their research and development efforts are focused on off-chain scaling technologies like Lightning Network. Another difference, we don't believe that everyone should run a node. If you're a normal user, you definitely shouldn't run a node. What you should do is you should run a wallet that queries the blockchain and processes whatever transactions you care about, which is a tiny fraction of them. And you just run a wallet. You don't have to validate everybody else's transactions. Whereas in the Bitcoin Core world, they really, really think it's important that every user runs a fully validating node, which really changes the calculus. If you want that, certainly you can't have terabyte-sized blocks. But if you don't care if everybody's running a node, if what you care about is permissionless sound digital money, maybe you don't need to run a node. Maybe blocks can be really big because businesses are the ones actually validating most of the transactions. So here's some basic numbers. You can run this yourself. I don't have the math printed on the screen, but this is, if you sort of work it out, if a transaction is, it's like 250 bytes or so, if blocks are 1 megabyte, what if you saturated the entire blockchain with sending everybody in the world one transaction? How long would that take? The only use of the blockchain is sending everybody in the world one transaction so that you can onboard the world. With 1 megabyte blocks, it would take 30 years. So obviously, you're not going to onboard the world to actually using Bitcoin with 1 megabyte blocks because no one's going to wait 30 years to get their first transaction. They're just going to use anything else. If you double the block size, well, it would take about 15 years. Again, if that's the only use of the blockchain. So you can start to run numbers. 2 megabytes is about where SegWit is right now. So they definitely can't onboard the world to SegWit because no one's going to wait 15 years to get their transaction. So you can run numbers on this like how long do you think they will wait, and so therefore what's the maximum number of users? It's more in the neighborhood of 1, maybe 10 million at best. 32 megabytes, this is where Bitcoin Cash is right now. It would take us about a year to onboard the entire world, but we're just getting started. We ultimately want to raise it to 1 terabyte or more. At 1 gigabyte, it would take about 10 days to onboard the world. At 1 terabyte, it would take about 15 minutes. So at 1 terabyte, you can onboard the world. Everybody could actually use this. In fact, 1 terabyte, if you run the numbers, that's what you need for everybody in the world to be doing about 50 transactions per day. We have about at least 6 implementations. Bitcoin ABC is the most important one because that's used by most of the miners. We have a bunch of others that are used for all sorts of different things: Bitcoin Unlimited, Bitcoin XT, Bitprim, Bcash, and Parity. Bcash is not the name of Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash. Bcash is a implementation of Bitcoin Cash in JavaScript. We upgrade the network every 6 months. So this is one of the cool properties of the Bitcoin Cash community because we're pretty aligned about certain things, including we actually do want to hard fork from time to time to fix things, to improve things, including raising the maximum block size. So we've had 3 upgrades. The first one, when Bitcoin Cash launched, we upgraded from 1 megabyte to 8 megabytes. And then in the recent hard fork, 8 megabytes to 32 megabytes. We've changed the difficulty adjustment algorithm twice. The first difficulty adjustment algorithm, we had to change it so that Bitcoin Cash could survive with the same proof of work function as Bitcoin. However, it had some issues that caused the difficulty to sort of vary wildly. And so we had to have a better difficulty adjustment algorithm to fix that in a later hard fork. We have a number of new opcodes that are actually the old opcodes from Bitcoin's early days that were later disabled, things like cat split and binary operations. These are actually quite useful. They're really basic primitives. We have a fix for quadratic hashing. What this is, I don't want to explain it really, but basically this allows you to validate some transactions more quickly, so it scales better. And we have a fix for some forms of transaction malleability. We have a lot of apps. So of course we have the apps that my company has built, yours and MoneyButton. We have another social network called Matter.app that's fully on-chain. It lets you post articles and stuff on-chain. We have Memo.cash and BlockPress. These are both decentralized Twitters based on Bitcoin Cash. So you can have sort of full censorship resistance with those products. We have a number of crowdfunding apps. We have Satoshi Dice, other gambling apps. We have TipperBot, things like that are ways of tipping on social media. ChainFeed is just a way of monitoring the op return data in transactions, plus a whole bunch of wallets and exchanges. Bitcoin Cash is very widely supported throughout the ecosystem. Most wallets and exchanges that support multiple currencies support Bitcoin Cash. Future developments, we're looking at enabling more opcodes and doing more advanced things with smart contracts. We are ultimately looking to get to terabyte-sized blocks if necessary. Of course, we have to have people using it if we're ever going to need to get that big. But this is where the R&D is focused, is on-chain scaling and ultimately getting to very, very big blocks if necessary, including all the way up to terabyte-sized blocks. We're looking at things like UTXO commitments and better wallets. I'll explain UTXO commitments in a second. We are also researching off-chain scaling solutions. It's not that on-chain necessarily replaces off-chain scaling. You can still do Lightning Network if you want to on Bitcoin Cash. There's just a whole lot less of a reason to do it. But actually, it works better on Bitcoin Cash because you don't have a bunch of the problems that you have when the maximum or when the sort of the number of transactions on chain is strictly limited. So, for instance, if a major hub were to close all of its channels all of a sudden, that would actually work on Bitcoin Cash, and you wouldn't have the issues you'd have on Bitcoin. So my last few slides here are a couple of articles and research whatnot on Bitcoin Cash. So this was, I think this was just either today or yesterday. Chris Pacia has the first atomic bet on Bitcoin Cash using new opcodes. So using things like cat and the binary, I think it's just cat and split. He was able to do an atomic bet. So there's a trust problem whenever you bet with someone. Do they actually pay you? In this case, you can guarantee that the outcome of the bet is random and that whoever wins actually gets paid in a fully decentralized way. So that's just kind of cool. cool proof of concept. We have Chris Pacia also did another innovative thing with the new opcodes. First, tree signature on Bitcoin Cash. So this is a way of doing multi-sig, basically, but where you hide the public keys that aren't used. So this is something that people are trying to do in the Bitcoin Core world. We can do it with just these sort of basic primitive opcodes on Bitcoin Cash. We also have working UTXO commitments. So this is another thing that improves with SPV. I'll explain if anybody wants to ask. But basically, this is a really important property to help it sort of improve the way that SPV wallets work, as well as to improve even things like mining, because ultimately you don't need to have the entire blockchain. Bitcoin fundamentally operates based on the UTXO set, not based on the history of all transactions. You don't need to keep most of the archival data around. You just basically need the UTXO set and the new transactions. So that's all the time I have for this talk. Does anybody have any questions about Bitcoin Cash? Just one question? Yes? Yes. So, did you do any work on porting that over to make it work with Bitcoin Cash? So we haven't tried, but actually it should work pretty much out of the box on Bitcoin Cash because it's pretty much the exact same. Our routed payment channel technology did not use SegWit. We used check sequence verify and a check lock time verify, which are both in Bitcoin Cash. So we haven't tried because we don't need it, and we're actually better off without it because it just makes everything way more complicated and weird. So it's actually way better for the users to not have to worry about that. Yes? So once you increase the block size to 1 terabyte,
who knows? I mean, don't you feel there's monopoly issues? Also, like the hashing power is so centralized at that stage.
Nope. Yeah, so first of all, good question. But no, I don't think there's a problem at all. Because it's still permissionless. So if you are actually good at mining, you can still mine. So I do expect there to be a handful of mining companies. I think it would probably look a lot like sort of the chipset world today. Like how many companies produce hardware, with nanometer-sized transistors and stuff like that. Like there's a number of companies that do that work. I'd expect it to look kind of like that. So, or it could be a monopoly. I mean, that's not out of the question that Bitmain just continues to blow everybody out of the water and they maintain their lead forever. I'd be pretty surprised if that actually lasted long term because nothing's stopping you from just outcompeting Bitmain if you can actually produce hardware, more cheaply than they can. So I don't think it's an issue. I mean, it sort of depends on what your goal is. Our goal is to create sound digital money for everyone in the world. Our goal is not for everybody to run a node. All right, I think I'm over, so that's it anyway, so thank you.